British Empire's obsession with the white man's burden, this idea of Europeans going out and improving, if you like, the rest of the world, providing education, better economic circumstances, development of all kinds to people who couldn't quite achieve that on their own. But it's very clear from some of the
Scenes of deprivation were most apparent when the travellers visited the old city of Fez, which Bowling called the native quarter.
What we're actually looking at is an entire medieval city. It's hardly just a quarter. The French adopted a sort of urban apartheid. They created what they tended to describe as a cordon sanitaire between their new city and the old city. This has sometimes been presented in quite a positive light in terms of preserving the architectural heritage of Morocco, keeping the old city intact. But the other side of it for the people who lived there was that the French also didn't want to mix with the locals. They saw them as dirty, unhealthy, and the French colonial city became the hub of political life, economic life, social life. So as a result, the old city was, if you like, frozen in time and began to die.
When the party comes to Fez, they set their camera up at the gate, which is in some ways the crossing point between the native quarters and the modern quarters. And the camera captures in brilliant color all these very interesting faces and distinct costumes and people doing strange things. So there's a kind of ethnographic quality here, a fascination with the exotic. And it even comes down to the pictures that they attempt to take of one young man whose hair had captured their attention. They describe him as having a tuft on the back of his head by which Muhammad would pull him up to heaven. And this little boy clearly thought that being filmed was going to keep him from getting to heaven, because at every opportunity he seemed to try and duck the gaze of the camera.
Africa, people can feel uncomfortable about being photographed or filmed. Visitors, particularly Westerners, tended to completely disregard. They felt as if North Africa and the other countries they visited in North Africa or the Orient or elsewhere were sort of just there for them to view. I think you see it more poignantly with the little girl in Tunisia who's standing there, and she doesn't have the confidence to just say no, go away, or to walk away. She's sort of totally disempowered by the camera. This footage really does show how poor a lot of people were. You see sort of the tattered clothes with holes. The children look dirty, they look unkempt, they don't look happy. It's a very sad picture, really. When the nationalist movements began to gather speed across North Africa at this period in the 1930s, one of the main criticisms of colonialism which indigenous people put forward was that it had impoverished them, that colonialists had come in and taken the wealth of their country, exploited the country, whilst they themselves had not been given the kind of benefits that they might have expected, such as citizenship, education, opportunities for employment. The only kind of opportunities they had were sort of at the lower levels of the administration or in the army.
The presence of African troops fascinated Bowling Wright. In the capital Rabat, he filmed several men recruited from the French colonies of West Africa.
These red-clad soldiers actually came from Senegal, but they were part of a huge contingent of African soldiers that the French drew on in the Second World War, and shortly they were to be fighting the Germans. The French needed African recruits for the very simple reason that the French suffered the most appalling slaughter during the First World War. So these African soldiers were going to fight for the soul of France in Europe.
What their involvement did trigger was a strong sense that they should be considered as equal. Their argument was, if our blood is equal to a Frenchman's and we can die on the battlefield for France, why should we not be granted equal political rights and independence if we wish it?
The movement for independence would gain momentum across North Africa after the war. But in another land, one under British control, the fight for self-determination was well underway. Palestine wasn't on the Wright family's itinerary, but it appears in another film in their collection that was also shot in 1989. It paints an extraordinary picture of a troubled land.
The film opens with a musical sequence where the music itself of call it joy and happiness in our time.
When springtime comes to Palestine, it colors all the contrasts of this ancient country and hovers over the